So we are reading Power versus Force by Dr. David Hawkins. We are on chapter 1, page number 51 of the book and 17 of the PDF.
Page 9 of the PDF.
Page 9 of the PDF.
The advent of artificial intelligence supercomputers has allowed the application of the theories of nonlinear dynamics to be applied to the study of brain function through the technique of neurophysiologic modeling. The function of memory, especially, is being studied by means of neural models among which attractor networks have been identified. Conclusions of current research are that the brain's neural networks act as a system of attractor patterns and that stored memories act as attractors, so that the system does not behave in a random fashion overall, although each individual neuron may behave in random fashion.
So what does this imply, right? It is saying that even the brain operates with the process of the attractor patterns. So now, whenever we do anything, whenever we perceive anything, certain neurons in the brain start getting activated. Now, for an action to take place, literally thousands or tens of thousands or maybe a million neurons will be acting in unison to create a certain effect, right? Now, when the neurons are connecting with each other, they form an attractor pattern that if you spark one neuron in a particular way, the entire attractor pattern will start to bloom up. And that results in our taking action. So the attractor pattern which started in the brain results in an action. That action results in something manifesting. So even the brain operates from this process of attractor patterns.
Neuron models of consciousness disclose a class of neural networks called constraint satisfaction systems. In these systems, a network of interconnected neuron units operates within a series of limits and thus sets up attractor patterns, some of which are now being identified with psychopathology. This kind of modeling correlates behavior with physiology and parallels the results of our kinesiologic muscle testing, demonstrating the connection between mind and body.
So what is it saying? That again, the neural pathways are created and they work within set parameters. So when they are operating, they create certain physiological and certain emotional issues which are there, right? And we can access those patterns which are created through the use of kinesiology, that is muscle testing. We will come to that, right? How do you muscle test? What is the implication of muscle testing and how it can connect the mind and the body? Because you're thinking of something and testing it on your body. So you can actually figure it out.
In terms derived from chaos theory, the clinical study described in the following pages has identified a phase space encompassing the full range of the evolution of human consciousness. Within this range, numerous attractor patterns of increasing power have been denoted. These patterns represent energy fields, which are qualities of consciousness itself rather than of any particular individual, as is shown by their occurrence across large populations over long periods of time, independent of testers or subjects.
Okay, so now what is this implying? That these neural patterns which are there can be found across populations. So one culture, because of their belief systems, may have a certain neurological pattern. Another culture for the same thing may have a different neurological pattern, but these can be identified and they can be tested using muscle testing.
The evolution of consciousness and the development of human society can be depicted in the mathematical term of non-linear dynamics. Our study concerned itself with a limited set of parameters of consciousness, which we calibrated from 1 to 1000. The numbers represent the logarithm to the base 10 of the power of the respective fields. The entire field or phase space of consciousness itself is unlimited, going on to infinity. The range of 1 to 600, representing the domain of the vast majority of human experience, is the primary scope of this study. The levels from 600 to 1000, the realm of non-ordinary evolution, of enlightenment, sages, and the highest spiritual states will also be described.
So what they are saying is that these patterns, right, and these physiological and psychological stuff which happens, they have created the scale, a scale from 1 to 1000, and it's based on the logarithm of 10, right? So if you are increasing by 1, it is to the power, it is not just one step up. So when I move from say 10 to 20, it is to the power of 10. It is not just from 10 to 20, that 10 points up. So if I'm shifting my state of consciousness, there is a really tremendous shift which is taking place. It's not a simple shift. Now, most of the stuff that we are doing, most of the people that we will be encountering are operating from the level of consciousness from 1 to 600. Beyond that, it is going into enlightenment, etc. So you're not going to find many people vibrating at the frequency of above 600.
Within the total field studied, sequential patterns emerged identifying the progressive powers of attractor fields, in which there were local variations but global consistency. Strange attractors can be of either high or low energy, and the critical point in our data appeared to be the calibration range of 200, below which the power of attractors could be described as weak or negative, above which as strong or positive. By the time we reached the calibration of 600, they were enormously powerful.
So what does this imply? That if you are calibrating to below 200, you are weak. And when we come to the chart, and we have seen this before, you will find that everything below 200 is on the left side of the grid, and everything above 200 is on the right side of the grid. So you can actually understand that when we are constantly saying that be aware of which side of the grid you're operating from, it automatically connects you to these levels of consciousness also.
An important element of chaos theory, helpful in understanding this evolution of consciousness, is the law of sensitive dependence on initial conditions. This refers to the fact that a slight variation over a course of time can have the effect of producing a profound change, much as a ship whose bearing is 1 degree off compass eventually finds itself hundreds of miles off course. This phenomenon, which we will refer to in more detail later, is an essential mechanism of all evolution and also underlies the potential of the creative process.
So a minute change somewhere can result in a big difference over time and space as we know it, right? So a small adjustment in your state of being, in your state of consciousness, can create a massive shift in your life.
In overview, we can see that from time immemorial, man has tried to make sense of the enormous complexity and frequent unpredictability of human behavior. A multitude of systems has been constructed to try to make that which is incomprehensible comprehensible. To make sense has ordinarily meant to be definable in terms that are linear, logical, and rational, but the process and therefore the experience of life itself is organic, that is to say, non-linear by definition. This is the source of man's inescapable intellectual frustration.
So what this paragraph is attempting to tell us is that we in our normal state of consciousness see things moving from A to B to C. But in actual fact, life, the way that it manifests, is manifesting at the same time. Everything is happening at the same time. We cannot distinguish that A to B to C all the time. Most of the time, things are happening, right? So any one thing to happen, there are multitude of things happening at the same time for it to manifest. And because we are unable to comprehend it, we are unable to wrap our head around it, we start feeling frustrated. Okay, but again, the point is that if we can bring a simple tool which can tell us yes or no, right, it cuts through the shaft, and this is what this system will allow us to do.
In this study, however, test responses were independent of our subjects' belief systems or intellectual content. What emerged were patterns of energy fields, which were aspects of consciousness itself, irrespective of individual identities. In common left brain, right brain parlance, we could say that the test subjects reacted globally to an attractor field, irrespective of the individual variation of their left brain logic, reason, or sequential thought systems. The results of the study indicate that profoundly powerful patterns organize human behavior.
So what it's saying is that there are patterns, these attractor field patterns exist across humanity. And they found that everyone reacts to certain stimuli in the same precise way. So your body will react to something which is depleting in a depleting manner, something which is uplifting in an uplifting manner, generally speaking.
We can intuit, then, an infinite domain of infinite potential. Consciousness itself, within which there is an enormously power attractor field organizing all of human behavior into what is innate to humanness. Within the giant attractor field are lesser fields of progressively less energy and power. These fields, in turn, dominate behavior so that definable patterns are consistent across cultures and time throughout human history. The interactions of these variations within attractor fields make up the history of civilization and mankind.
So what is it saying? That these attractor fields, there are big attractor fields and there are smaller attractor fields. And their interaction, the bigger and the smaller, is resulting in the way that we are living life, in all our patterns, in the way that human beings actually act and actually react and actually live life is determined by these attractor fields.
A side study, not herein reported, indicated that the animal kingdoms as well are also controlled by attractor fields of hierarchic power. Our study correlates well with Rupert Sheldrake's morphogenic field hypothesis, as well as Carl Pribram's holographic model of brain-mind function.
So again, Rupert Sheldrake coined the term morphogenic field. That what is a morphogenic field? That anything that is happening in the world, leaves a resonance or a blueprint in the morphogenic field. So if you can tune into the field, you can download it. And Priam's holographic model. So he said that everything is operating in a holographic model. So what is a hologram? Everything is available in the smallest part of the hologram, right? So again, the microcosm is available in the macrocosm, the macrocosm is available in the microcosm. So nothing is distinguishable from anything else. Everything affects everything else. This is the concept of the morphogenic field as well as the holographic universe field.
Note that in a holographic universe, the achievements of every individual contribute to the advancement and well-being of the whole. Our study also correlates with the conclusions reached by Nobelist Sir John Eccles that the brain acts as a receiving set for energy patterns residing in the mind itself, which exist as consciousness expressed in the form of thought. It is the vanity of the ego that claims thoughts as mine. Genius, on the other hand, commonly attributes the source of creative leaps of awareness to that basis of all consciousness, which has traditionally been called divinity.
So whenever you talk to a genius, right, they'll say it came to me. It was a download, right? I didn't think of it. So what are they doing? They're connecting to that expanded state of consciousness, which we can call divinity, we can call expanded state, connecting to our higher self and whatever, right? Now, the point is that the brain is a physical item or a physical thing which acts like a receiver and a transmitter. The brain is not where the mind resides. When you look at the holographic universal theory, the mind resides in the hologram, right? So the mind is everywhere. And what the brain is receiving, it is translating what the mind is saying. But now, where does the mind come from, right? That is the question that is being asked. So like we said, that when we draw a straight line, there is a sacred field which is created before the line. If that sacred field, that BG3 field would not have been created, the line would not be there. So what created the BG3 also? Again, we go into higher and higher states of divinity. So as we are progressing, even when you look at all the focus levels that we are talking about, right? As we go higher and higher in the focus levels, it becomes subtler and subtler and subtler and subtler, and it becomes more powerful at the same time. So what he's saying clearly over here is that all genius, all knowledge actually comes from an expanded state of mind. It's a download.
2. History-aced methodology. The basis of this work is research done over a 20-year period involving millions of calibrations on thousands of test subjects of all ages and personality types from all walks of life. By design, the study is clinical in method and thus has widespread pragmatic implications. Because the testing method is valid in application to all forms of human expression, calibrations have successfully been taken for literature, architecture, art, science, world events, and the complexities of human relationships. The test pace for the determination of the data is the totality of the human experience throughout all time.
So what it's saying is that the way that the testing was done, you can actually test at what level of consciousness anything is operating at, whether it be a thing, it be a piece of literature, it be a piece of art, it could be anything. So you can actually calibrate what level of consciousness anything is operating at.
Mentally, test subjects range from what the world calls normal to severely ill psychiatric patients. Subjects were tested in Canada, the United States, Mexico, and throughout South America and Northern Europe. They were of all nationalities, ethnic backgrounds, and religions ranging in age from children to elders in their 90s and covered a wide spectrum of physical and emotional health. Subjects were tested individually and in groups by many different testers and groups of testers. But in all cases, without exception, the results were identical and entirely reproducible, fulfilling the fundamental requirement of the scientific method, perfect experimental replicability.
So again, what he is attempting to say that the process with which this chart was developed was tested over millions of subjects, over millions of tests which were done, and then they came to these conclusions. And most of the time, people had the same reaction.
Subjects were selected at random and tested in a wide array of physical and behavioral settings, on top of mountains and at the seashore, at holiday parties and during the course of everyday work, in moments of joy and moments of sorrow. None of these circumstances had any effect on test results, which were found to be universally consistent, irrespective of any extraneous factor, with the singular exception of the methodology of the testing procedure itself. Because of the significance of this factor, the testing method will be described in detail below. Historical background. In 1971, three physiotherapists published a definitive study on muscle testing. Dr. George Goodhart of Detroit, Michigan, has studied muscle testing techniques extensively in his clinical practice and made the breakthrough discovery that the strength or weakness of every muscle was connected to the health or pathology of a specific corresponding body organ. He further determined that each individual muscle was associated with an acupuncture meridian and correlated his work with that of the physician Felix Mann on the medical significance of the acupuncture meridians.
So again, every chakra is connected to a meridian. Every chakra is connected to an organ. Every organ is connected to a muscle, right? In fact, in the life system, we have that each and every tooth is connected to an organ. So it is connected to a meridian system. So everything is interrelated. You get that? So what he's saying is that he could figure out that muscle testing, because each muscle is related to a certain organ. So if you test the muscle, you can test how the organ is performing.
By 1976, Goodhart's book on applied kinesiology had reached its 12th edition. He began to teach the technique to his colleagues and also published monthly research tapes. His work was rapidly picked up by others, which led to the formation of the International College of Kinesiology, many members of which also belonged to the Academy of Preventive Medicine. A thorough exposition of the development of the field was detailed by David Walther in his extensive volume on applied kinesiology, also published in 1976. The most striking finding of kinesiology initially was a clear demonstration that muscles instantly become weak when the body is exposed to harmful stimuli.
So this is important, right? Muscles always become weak when exposed to harmful stimuli. So anything that is not good for you will make your body system weak. Okay, this is the basis of this entire testing process.
For instance, if a patient with hypoglycemia put sugar on his tongue, on muscle testing, the deltoid muscle, the one usually used as an indicator, instantly went weak. Accordingly, it was discovered that substances which were therapeutic to the body made the muscles instantly become strong.
So what does this imply? We can use muscle testing to actually test which medication will be good for us and which will not be good for us. Okay, you can actually use this process of testing.
Because the weakness of any particular muscle indicated the presence of a pathologic process in its corresponding organ, corroborated by diagnosis through acupuncture and physical or laboratory examination. It was a highly useful clinical tool to detect disease. Thousands of practitioners began to use the method and data rapidly accumulated showing kinesiology to be an important and reliable diagnostic technique which could accurately monitor a patient's response to treatment.
So if you know the muscle is weak, you can know which organ has a problem and what is the kind of problem that also can be diagnosed simply by using muscle testing.
The technique found widespread acceptance among professionals from many disciplines, and although it never caught on in mainstream medicine, it was used extensively by holistically oriented physicians. One of these was Dr. John Diamond, a psychiatrist who began to use kinesiology in diagnosing and treating psychiatric patients. He labeled this extended use of kinesiology behavioral kinesiology. While other investigators were researching the usefulness of the method in detecting allergies, nutritional disorders, and resistance to medication, Dr. Diamond used the technique to research the beneficial or adverse effects of a great variety of psychological stimuli, such as art forms, music, facial expression, voice modulation, and emotional stress. He was an excellent teacher, and his seminars attracted thousands of professionals who returned to their own practices with renewed interest and curiosity as they explored applications of the technique. In addition to its inclusive applicability, the test was quick, simple, easy to perform, and highly decisive. All researchers confirmed the absolute replicability of test results. For example, an artificial sweetener made every subject test weak, whether placed on the tongue, held in its package adjacent to the solar plexus, or hidden in a plain envelope, the contents of which neither the tester nor the subject knew.
So artificial sweeteners will always make people weak. Okay, it will always make people weak. And we've also tested this many, many times in awareness also.
That the body responded even when the mind was naive was most impressive. Most practitioners did their own verification research, placing various substances in plain, numbered envelopes and having a naive second person test a third. The overwhelming conclusion was that the body would indeed respond accurately, even when the conscious mind was unaware.
So even if you're unaware as to what's happening in or what's in the envelope, it will result in the test showing that artificial sweetener is weak. So like that, you can put other stuff in envelopes. You really don't know what is there. And you can do a muscle test to figure out whether it makes you go weak or whether it makes you go strong. So whether it's good for you or not good for you can be tested basically using muscle testing. Yes, Chachi?
Yeah, I was asking even stevia, that's a plant-based artificial sweetener.
Yeah. So
That
again, you
also-
need to test it. You need to test over here. I think when they're talking about artificial sweetener, they're basically looking at what's that called? Estrogen.
Okay.
Aspartame.
The saccharine.
Aspartame. Sorry.
Aspartame.
Yeah, they're basically talking about aspartame, and aspartame has a real detrimental effect on ourselves, on us. And when we were doing the training for the life system, they said that aspartame cannot be digested by our system. So it gets out with our urine and our feces, and then it is non-biodegradable. So it doesn't degrade also. So in fact, they've done some studies where underground water reservoirs, etc., underground water sources are getting contaminated by aspartame. So they find aspartame in underground water also, because, and especially in America where they've been using it a lot. So artificial sweeteners are actually very bad. But stevia, of course, you can test. But even stevia, some of the stevia is processed. So when it gets processed, it will again maybe testing weakening only rather than strengthening.
So that means all packaged processed food, everything is bad.
Most of the packaged food will be detrimental. It will make you go weak. Most of the packaged food. Literally all packaged food has sweeteners. 90% of it.
The reliability of the testing experience never ceased to amaze the public and patients, and for that matter, the practitioners themselves. When this author was on the lecture circuit, for instance, in audiences of 1,000 people, 500 envelopes containing artificial sweetener would be passed out to the audience along the 500 identical envelopes containing organic vitamin C. The audience would be divided up and would alternate testing each other. When the envelopes were opened, the audience reaction was always one of amazement and delight when they saw that all had gone weak in response to the artificial sweetener and strong in response to the vitamin C. The nutritional habits of thousands of families across the country were changed by this simple demonstration.
So when you see something actually happening in front of you, it automatically creates a shift in you, right? So now 500 people are doing the test or 1,000 people are doing the test and it's becoming consistently there. Then automatically you realize that, yeah, this thing is not good for me, and you stop using it.
In the early 1970s, the medical profession in general and psychiatry in particular was highly resistant, if not forthrightly hostile, to the idea that nutrition had much to do with health at all, let alone emotional health or brain function. Publication of the book Orthonocular Psychiatry by this author and Nobelist Linus Pauling received a favorable reception from a wide variety of audiences, but not from the medical establishment. Interestingly enough, 20 years later, the concepts presented in the book are fundamental to current treatment of mental illness.
So the medical community is always very slow to accept stuff which is not in their paradigm. So they are all operating in a box, basically. They don't have wider views. I've requested so many doctors to attend sessions to understand these things, but they are so stuck in their paradigm that it's very difficult to shake them.
The thrust of the book was that serious mental illnesses such as psychosis, as well as lesser ones such as emotional disorder, had a genetic basis involving an biochemical pathway in the brain, a molecular basis which could be corrected on the molecular level. Manic depressive schizophrenia, alcoholism, and depression, therefore, could be affected by nutrition as well as medication. In 1973, when the book was published, the psychiatric establishment was still psychoanalytically oriented. The work was accepted primarily by holistic practitioners. The suggested treatment methods and results were frequently verified with kinesiology.
So again, what it's saying is that a lot of this stuff, the nutrition, the food that we eat can act as medicine. this is not really accepted by allopaths, right? Because they considered the molecule or the medication to do the treatment. They did not consider that nutrition was a very important factor. In fact, till now, they don't even consider that water is a very important factor. I don't think any doctor asks you how much water or what quality of water are you drinking, right? So like that, now at least they've started asking about diet, but they're still far away from asking about water and even examining the way that you're breathing. These two things are still not there in the regular medical community. I think these two things also need to start coming in.
However, it was Dr. Diamond's demonstration that the body instantly went weak in response to unhealthy emotional attitudes or mental stresses, which had the greatest ongoing clinical influence. His refinement of the muscle testing technique, the one used by most practitioners, was used in this study over a period of 15 years. It was universally observed by practitioners and researchers as well as this author that test responses were completely independent of the test subject's belief systems, intellectual opinions, reason, or logic. It was also observed that a test response where the subject went weak was accompanied by desynchronization of the cerebral hemispheres.
So what does it say? Whenever you're stressed out, it shows that you're not operating in a whole brain state. The left and the right side of the brain are working diametrically opposite each other. This is something that when we did the 7 chakra workshop also, in that also it was very clearly seen that in normal case, a person is in equilibrium. And now as soon as that person thinks of something that is mentally disturbing or stressing to him or her, the chakras also stop vibrating and moving in the way that they need to be moving and vibrating, right? So again, it is affecting the energy field. So our thoughts are affecting the energy field. The energy field is affecting the body. The body is affecting the energy field and also affecting our thoughts. So everything becomes interrelated. Nothing can be separated from the other thing.
The testing technique. 2 persons are required. One acts as test subject by holding out one arm laterally, parallel to the ground. The second person then presses down with 2 fingers on the wrist of the extended arm and says, the second person then presses down with 2 fingers on the wrist of the extended arm and says, resist. The subject then resists the downward pressure with all his strength. That is all there is to it.
So what you do is you raise your arm like this and the other person will push it down, right? And will be aware of the amount of pressure that that person is using to push it down. So you determine the strength of how easy or hard it is to keep your hand up, right? Now, anything that you take in your other hand, if it weakens you, you will not be able to resist. The hand will go down. If something is giving you energy, it is giving you strength and it is good for you, your hand will stay up. It will be more difficult for the second person to push the hand down. So basically, that's the crux of the muscle testing. Of course, there is another smaller way which you can do independently and individually. In this way, you need 2 people. You need the tester and the person who is doing the testing, right? So person who's getting tested and the person who's doing the testing. But there is another way in which you can do it for yourself. You don't need to be separated.
A statement may be made by either party. While the subject holds it in mind, his arm strength is tested by the tester's downward pressure. If the statement is negative or false or reflects a calibration below 200, the test subject will go weak. If the answer is yes or calibrates over 200, he will go strong.
So again, anything above 200 is strong, anything below 200 is weak, right? And whatever that item is, with using that process, you can understand that is it weakening you or is it strengthening you? Anything that weakens you is no point in keeping in your life.
Demonstrate the procedure. One might have the subject hold an image of Abraham Lincoln in mind while being tested, and then, for contrast, an image of Adolf Hitler. The same effect can be demonstrated by holding in mind someone who is loved in contrast to someone who is feared or hated or about whom there is some strong regret. Once a numeric scale is elucidated, calibrations can be arrived at by stating this item, example, this book, organization, or the person's motive is over 100, then over 100, then over 300, until a negative response is obtained. The calibration can then be refined. It is over 220, 225, 230, etc. Tester and testee can trade places and the same results will be obtained. Once one is familiar with the technique, it can be used to evaluate companies, movies, individuals, events in history, or for the diagnosis of current life problems.
So again, this testing process can be used for anything and everything, right? You can test anything.
The test procedure, the reader will note, is to use the muscle test to verify the truth or falsity of a declarative statement. Unreliable responses will be obtained if the question has not been put into this form.
So again, the point becomes, asking the right question is again very important. This is something that we see in the excursion also, that when we are going into expanded states and we are asking for answers, the clarity of a question has to be very, very precise, right? So here also you need to know what's the right question to ask.
The test procedure, the reader will note, is to use the muscle test to verify the truth or falsity of a declarative statement. Unreliable responses will be obtained if the question has not been put into this form. Nor can any reliable result be obtained from inquiry into the future. Only statements regarding existent conditions or events will produce consistent answers.
So what are we talking about, right? Because you're testing in the present, in the now, generally speaking, the results will be valid for the now. Now, again, going one step forward, you could test for the future, but the reliability of the answer will be a question mark. But again, if you intuitively develop that sense of it, you can actually start using the system to go into the future also. Now, that is something that I have experienced, right? But it is not according to the book.
It is necessary to be impersonal during the procedure to avoid transmitting positive or negative feelings. Accuracy is increased by having the test subject close his eyes. There should be no music in the background.
So music can influence our state of mind. So naturally, it's better to do this testing in a silent place, or if you have the ability to actually block out the stimulus that is coming into our sensory organs, right? So like, you create a reball, you calm yourself down and then do the testing. That's a better way to really do the testing.
Because the test is so deceptively simple, it is well that an inquirer first verify its accuracy to his own satisfaction. Responses can be checked by cross-questioning and everyone who becomes acquainted with the technique thinks of tricks to satisfy himself that it is reliable. It will soon be found that the same response is observed in all subjects, that it is not necessary for them to have any knowledge of the matter in question, and that the response will always be independent of the test subject's personal opinions about the question. Before presenting an inquiry, we have found it instrumental to first test the statement, I may ask this question.
So this is very important, right? It may not be the right time for you to ask the question. So this is something that I practice all the time when I'm going to do energy rectification anywhere. The first thing I ask is, can we do the testing? Then whenever we get an answer that, okay, this is a test, then when we want to do a rectification, we ask, can we do the rectification? So it's always better to ask before you use these tools.
This is analogous to the entry requisite on a computer terminal and will occasionally return a no answer. This indicates that one should leave that question alone or inquire into the reason for the no. Perhaps the questioner might have experienced psychological distress from the answer or its implications at that time. In the study, test subjects were asked to focus on a specified thought, feeling, attitude, a memory, relationship, or life circumstance. The test was frequently done in large groups of people. For demonstration purposes, we first established a baseline by asking the subjects, eyes closed, to hold in mind the memory of a time when they were angry, upset, jealous, depressed, guilty, or fearful. At that point, everyone universally went weak. We would then ask them to hold in mind a loving person or life situation, and all would go strong. Typically, a murmur of surprise rippled through the audience at the implication they just discovered.
Okay, I think we can stop here today.